Hey, let me tell you a story. He found her on a hidden forum where people didn't look for pleasure or love, but for a very specific kind of exit. It wasn't a suicide board and it wasn't a crime ring. It was something colder and more deliberate. A place where people with final desires met others who wanted to honor those desires in exact detail. She had posted just once, saying she wanted to die during the most intimate moment of her life, that she didn't want screaming or panic, only a calm hand and someone who understood that it was not murder but mercy. Most people ignored her or wrote cruel replies, but one man answered. His message was short and oddly gentle. He said he wasn't interested in pain or dominance, only in fulfilling a request from someone who truly wanted it. Nothing more and nothing less. They began talking in private. Their conversations were clinical and calm. No flirtation. No emotional games. Only structure and intention. Days turned into weeks, then into months. She explained her background in careful detail. How she had lived a stable life. How she had always felt calm about her own death. Not suicidal, just certain that her story deserved an intentional ending. He answered with honesty, explaining that the thought of taking a life under full consent had followed him for years, not as a fantasy, but as a steady sense of purpose that nothing else in his life could match. They began sharing scenarios and discussing exact timing. She described her perfect moment, a private act of intimacy where fear would not exist and where love and death would blend into one coherent decision. He listened carefully and adjusted his plan to meet every request. One evening she wrote that, if it was truly going to happen, she wanted to marry him first. She said a legal commitment would make everything feel complete, as if her life had naturally reached a final chapter and hadn't been torn away by chaos. He didn't hesitate and agreed immediately, suggesting a civil ceremony in Virginia where no witnesses were required. She thanked him for taking her seriously, and they marked the date. From that moment, they refined every detail of the pact. They met once in person before the ceremony in a small cafe near the courthouse. He arrived much earlier to observe the space, the light through the windows, and the available exits, because control always brought him clarity. When she arrived, she was calm and wore a light gray coat while carrying a small notebook. Their conversation remained focused on logistical points, such as legal documents and disposal timing. At one point, she said the moment itself had to be gentle and honest, and he felt a quiet recognition in his chest as if their intentions were completely aligned. On the morning of the wedding, she wore a pure white sheath gown and spent time in front of the mirror, not to admire herself, but to confirm her decision. Outside the courthouse, the air was cold and clear as he waited near the entrance with a plain envelope in his hand. When she approached, he opened the door and walked in beside her. The clerk was distracted and read the vows slowly without emotion. When she repeated, "Until death do us part," she looked directly into his eyes, her voice steady and unwavering. He repeated the same words with equal precision. They signed the certificate, and the clerk offered a polite congratulations before returning to his papers. They left in silence and walked down the quiet street like two people who had completed something irreversible. That evening they entered the apartment he had prepared specifically for the pact. She removed her shoes and walked the edges of the room in silence, tracing her fingers against the walls, observing the city lights through the large windows as if memorizing the world one last time. She asked him to play the music they had selected together, and he did. Soft ambient tones without lyrics filling the room like a gentle fog. She drank a small glass of wine and asked if he remembered every step of the pact. When he said yes, she gave a quiet nod and moved toward the bedroom. He followed at a measured pace, as though stepping into a ritual written long ago. The room glowed softly, with candles placed around the perimeter, and on the knitstand a folded white cloth lay beside a polished blade. She lay on the bed and asked him to dim the light. He paused in front of the switch to absorb the atmosphere, and then lowered the light until only the flicker of the candle remained. He sat beside her not as a lover, but as a participant in a sacred act. Their eyes held each other in calm understanding. She asked one final time if he would hesitate, and he answered no. Feeling a wave of relief move through her body, their movement together was silent and rhythmic, her breathing steady and deliberate like she had practiced it her whole life. When the moment came, she whispered the signal, and he reached for the blade exactly as they had planned, pressing it gently against the agreed location. There was no scream or struggle, only a long breath that left her body like a flickering flame. He held her for a long moment as the silence settled around them like a heavy blanket, then carefully wrapped her in the white cloth and remained seated until the candles burned low. After cleaning every surface and confirming that no trace of them remained, he lifted her carefully into the trunk they had chosen together. At dawn, he drove toward the abandoned bridge that had been selected weeks before, parking in the blind spot behind the broken guardrail. He lowered the trunk into the dark water below and watched as it vanished without a sound. The surface remained perfectly still and reflected the first pale light of morning as if nothing had ever disturbed it. When he returned to the apartment, he sat at the small table in complete silence, not thinking, not regretting, only allowing the stillness to settle over him like a quiet shelter. During the following 3 days, he barely spoke or ate and continued moving from room to room, pausing in each doorway as if half expecting her to still be present somewhere in the shadows. Slowly the sense of calm began to fade and was replaced by a soft pull in his chest, as if something unseen was reminding him that another soul could be waiting for the same kind of release. After a week, he logged back into the forum and scanned through dozens of messages, discarding those that were frantic or incoherent until one stood out for its clarity and composure. It was a brief, precise message from a woman asking if there was a way to leave the world without chaos or fear and with full understanding and consent. He answered in a calm, measured tone, explaining that it was possible and that he had already fulfilled such a request. The reply came quickly, and their conversation began. She did not ask for elegance or romance, only silence and control. She wanted it to happen in a cheap motel room, with 2 candles and no music. He asked her to describe the exact position and timing she preferred, and she provided every detail with steady precision. Together they selected a remote motel on the edge of West Virginia, located near an abandoned asphalt plant and far from any signs of life. She closed her accounts, prepared a letter suggesting she had left the state, and informed him that everything was ready. He rented the room under a false name and spent the afternoon preparing it, cleaning the surfaces, checking sight lines, adjusting the lighting and placing the candles and a simple gas station ring on the nightstand. He rehearsed where he would stand and how he would move, speaking no words and making no unnecessary gestures. When she arrived that night, she was calm and carried only a small bag. She changed in the bathroom and returned in a plain white gown, standing in front of him and quietly confirming that she was ready. He placed the ring on her finger as she had requested, and she gave a single slow nod. She then reclined on the bed and asked him to turn off the overhead light and leave only the candles burning. He moved to the switch and paused briefly to absorb the stillness of the moment before lowering the light. He stepped to the edge of the bed and waited until her breathing slowed and deepened to the rhythm she had described in their conversations. Once she reached this precise rhythm, she whispered the signal. Without hesitation, he reached for the blade and executed the pact exactly as agreed. Her body softened immediately into stillness. The room remained quiet except for the distant hum of trucks moving along the highway. He remained beside her for several minutes as the candlelight flickered across the walls, and then carefully wrapped her in the blanket they had selected together, lifting her with steady arms and carrying her to the vehicle. The drive to the asphalt plant was silent, Tall, motionless trees, passing like dark silhouettes in the cold night. Upon arriving, he descended to the water pit and gently lowered her into the black surface, watching until her form disappeared completely under the water. He stayed there until the first light began to emerge on the horizon, the water perfectly still and indifferent. Then he walked back to the car and drove away. Later that morning, he sat in a quiet diner and opened his laptop. His fingers moved steadily across the keyboard as he typed a short message to the forum stating that the final request had been honored exactly as promised. After a few minutes, another message appeared, calm but desperate, asking if someone could help fulfill the same kind of pact. As he read the new message, he realized that this was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of what he had been made to do. And somewhere out there, another pact was already waiting to be written. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and stay close.